My dear learners, in this session we will study about financial statements of companies and how to prepare balance sheet according to Companies Act 2013 in vertical format according to Schedule 3 Part 1. Welcome my dear learners. Before we start with today's session, let us understand the learning outcomes of this topic. By the end of this chapter, you would be able to draw the format of balance sheet as per the Companies Act 2013. You will be in position to classify various assets and liabilities. To understand the headings and subheadings of liabilities as well as assets, you will be able to differentiate between various items and their placement in the balance sheet. You will also be able to analyze as well as compare the values of previous year with the current year and can take certain decisions. Balance sheet. It is one of the important financial statements for any company. Balance sheet is prepared in a vertical form as prescribed by Schedule 3 Part 1 of Companies Act 2013. Balance sheet is broadly divided under two heads. Head 1 is called as equity and liabilities, that is liability side, and other part is assets. According to Companies Act 2013, balance sheet of companies are prepared in a vertical format which contains 4 columns. Column 1 is for particulars, which contains the details of all the liabilities followed by all the assets. Second column is notes to accounts, where we mention the note numbers. Next column is about the figures for current year, and the last and the fourth column contains the figures of previous year. Broadly, liabilities are split under 4 heads. Title number 1 is shareholder funds, which further contains 3 parts: share capital, reserves and surplus, money received against share warrants. Second heading of liability side is share application, money pending allotment. This is not to be considered from board's point of view. Third head is of non-current liabilities, means those liabilities which are to be settled for a period more than 1 year. This further contains 4 subheads. First is long-term borrowing, second is deferred tax liability, next is other long-term liabilities, and the fourth subhead is long-term provisions. Fourth and the last head of liability side of the balance sheet is current liabilities, which again has 4 subheads. First subheading is short-term borrowings. Second subheading is trade payables. Next is current liabilities. Then we have short-term provisions. Once the liabilities are finished, immediately under liabilities, assets are represented. Assets are broadly classified under 2 heads. First head is non-current assets. Non-current assets have total 5 subheadings. First subheading is fixed asset, which further is split under 4 categories: tangible assets, intangible assets, capital work in progress, intangible assets under development. Second subheading is non-current investments. Next subheading is deferred tax assets. Another subheading is long-term loans and advances. And last subheading of first head is other non-current assets. Moving on with the last title of assets is current assets. Current assets are further split under five categories. Six categories. First is current investments. Next represents inventories. Third, it is trade receivables. Next is cash and cash equivalents. Then it is short-term provision advances and loans. And finally, it is other current assets. Students have to make a note, we cannot change the order of these liabilities or assets. Its order is fixed and we have to prepare strictly according to this format. First item which is placed in the balance sheet in particular columns is equity and liability. It contains four main headings. First heading of equity and liability is shareholders fund, which further consists of three subheadings. First subheading under shareholders fund is titled as share capital. Share capital is the first item on the liability side and it constitutes two types of capitals, equity share capital and preference share capital. Equity as well as preference share capital is placed under share capital. Share capital can be classified further in three parts. First, authorized capital. It is the maximum capital with which any company is registered. In short, this is the maximum capital which any company can raise from the market. Second classification is issued capital. Issued capital is part of authorized capital which is actually issued by the company to the public. Last and the final is subscribed capital. Subscribed capital includes the adjustments for calls in arrears, if any, they are subtracted, and we add the forfeited shares, if any, and the net result is placed in subscribed capital and is shown in the amount column inside the balance sheet. Now, for example, authorized capital. For example, if a company has registered with 1 lakh equity shares, that is part of authorized capital. Company decided to issue only 80,000 shares in the market. That 80,000 will become the part of issued capital, and out of 80,000, now it is up to public, they may apply up to 80,000 or it can be less than 80,000. जितना actual में shareholders apply करेंगे, that part falls under the title of subscribed capital. Second subheading of shareholders fund is reserves and surplus. So as per schedule 3, there are few type of reserves. Its classification is capital reserve, capital redemption reserve, security premium. There are other reserves like investment fluctuation fund, workman compensation fund. They are put under the category of other reserves and are placed under reserves and surplus. Next is surplus. Surplus, it can be a positive balance from statement of profit and loss in the form of profit. It is shown in the surplus heading. It can even be a negative balance which will be shown. It is a negative balance which will be shown under debit balance as a negative value. There can be another item of revaluation reserve, and the last, it is debenture redemption reserve. This item is also put under reserves and surplus head. Last title of shareholder fund is money received against share warrants, which is not part of the syllabus. Second heading of balance sheet under liabilities is application received pending allotment. This item is also not to be treated for syllabus point of view. Next, third heading is very important, which is titled as non-current liabilities. Non-current liabilities means all those liabilities which have to be discharged for a period exceeding 1 year. एक साल से ऊपर, more than 12 months के जो operating cycle की liabilities हैं, that all are put under the title non-current liabilities. Non-current liabilities have further four subheadings. First subheading is long-term borrowings. Long-term borrowings include broadly these four items: debentures, bank loan, mortgage loan, and public deposit. Broadly, these four items are shown under the title of long-term borrowings. Second item is deferred tax liability. This is not to be treated for syllabus. Next, third heading is other long-term liabilities. So all the liabilities other than point 1 and point 2 which are for a longer period, like premium payable on redemption of debentures or preference shares. These items are to be shown under other long-term liability. Fourth and last subheading under non-current liability is long-term provisions. This includes provision for gratuity or provision for earned leaves. Last heading under the liability section of balance sheet is current liabilities. All those liabilities which a company has to discharge within an operating cycle of 12 months is put under current liabilities. सिंपल, वो सारी लाइबिलिटीज जो कंपनी को विद इन 1 year डिस्चार्ज करनी होती हैं, वो सारी लाइबिलिटीज हम करंट लाइबिलिटीज हेड में शो करते हैं. अंडर दिस, our first subheading is short-term borrowings. Short-term borrowings include bank overdraft और loan payable on demand. कि कंपनी ने, फर्म ने कोई भी ऐसा लोन किसी भी थर्ड पार्टी से लिया है which has to be payable immediately whenever it is called upon. Therefore, its nature becomes short-term. Next, second title, that is subheading under current liabilities, is trades payable. Trade payable generally include creditors and bill payables. Third subheading is other current liabilities. It's an important section. This includes interest accrued, incomes received in advance, unpaid dividends, calls in advance. Remember, एक term है calls in arrears, which is shown in under subscribed capital heading, whereas calls in advance are shown under other current liabilities. Next is outstanding expenses. These are also shown under other current liabilities. Last head is short-term provisions, which includes all the provisions which are less than 1 year span, like provision for tax, provision for doubtful debt, provision for depreciation. These provisions or any other provision which has been created for a period under or up to 1 year is shown under this title. Second title of the balance sheet is assets. Assets are generally placed in particular column after completing the detail of liabilities as a second heading. Assets are further classified under two heads. Its first head is titled as non-current assets. In simple words, all those assets which have a long-term values or the assets which stay with the company for a period more than 12 months are all shown under the title non-current assets. This is the main heading. Under this, we have broadly 5 subheadings. First subheading is fixed assets, which is further classified under four subtitles. First subtitle of fixed asset is known as tangible assets. All the assets for a period of more than 1 year which can be seen and touched, वो सारे assets जिनको हम देख सकते हैं, touch कर सकते हैं, they are shown under tangible assets. For example, furniture, land and building, plant and machinery, livestock, vehicles, etc. Second subheading is intangible assets. All the assets which cannot be seen or touched fall under the category of intangible assets. Means वो assets जिनको हम touch नहीं कर सकते, देख नहीं सकते, but they have their existence and they have their value are put under the title intangible assets. For example, goodwill, brands or trademark, computer softwares, mining rights, publishing titles, patents, copyrights, intellectual property rights. Third subheading of fixed asset is capital work in progress. Capital work in progress means कोई भी हमारे buildings, कोई plant machinery which is under installation, जो building under construction है, कोई आपका furniture जो अभी बन रहा है, that all type of items which can be seen, which can be touched, but still they are not completely either delivered or they are not completely ready, are put under the title capital work in progress. क्योंकि ये हमें अगर अभी डिलीवर नहीं हुई हैं या हम इनको अभी इमीडिएटली प्रोडक्शन प्रोसेस के लिए यूज नहीं कर सकते, these are put under the title capital work in progress. Next title is intangible assets under development. Intangible assets under development means ये वो assets हैं जो हम देख नहीं सकते, टच नहीं कर सकते और ये अभी completely ready नहीं है. For example, software under development. आपकी कंपनी ने कोई सॉफ्टवेयर का ऑर्डर किसी दूसरी कंपनी को प्लेस किया है, इन द मीन टाइम आपका फाइनेंशियल ईयर क्लोज हो रहा है और वो सॉफ्टवेयर अभी completely ready नहीं है. So that item और आपकी कंपनी ने कोई पेटेंट्स अप्लाई किए हैं एंड इन द मीन टाइम अभी पेटेंट्स अप्रूव नहीं हुए लेकिन आपका फाइनेंशियल ईयर क्लोज हो रहा है, such items are shown under intangible assets under development. Second subheading of non-current assets is non-current investments. So any type of investment which your company, for which you are preparing a balance sheet, has done, any investment done by your company into another company in the form of bonds. It can be government bonds, for mutual funds, for purchasing shares of any other company or the property. Such investments which are for a period longer than 1 year are shown under non-current investments. Third subheading is deferred tax asset. This item is not again in the syllabus. Fourth subheading of non-current asset is long-term loans and advances. So long-term loans and advances means कोई भी एडवांस जो हमारी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन ने किसी सप्लायर को या किसी एम्प्लॉय को मोर देन 1 ईयर के लिए दिया है, that is to be shown under this head. Last subheading of non-current asset is other non-current assets. This includes items like unamortized. Unamortized means not written off, discount or loss on issue of debentures और शेयर इशू एक्सपेंसेस. जब कंपनी अपने शेयर्स इशू करती है तो शेयर्स इशू करने के लिए lakhs they have to spend some expenditures. Similarly, whenever company issue debentures at discount or they redeem the debentures at premium but they were not issued on premium, in such a situation company को कुछ losses arise होते हैं that are to be written off gradually if those part of the discount or loss on issue of debentures जो कंपनी ने अभी write off नहीं किया और unamortized है, which is to be carried forward to second or third or fourth year, is shown in the heading non-current assets. Last and the final heading of the balance sheet is current assets. Current assets are those assets which has an operating cycle of 12 months or less than 12 months. वो सारे assets जिनका operating cycle under 12 months रहता है, these items are shown under current assets. इसके further 6 subheads हैं. We cannot change the order of any item under the balance sheet. सब items को आप ऊपर नीचे लिख सकते हो, बट किसी भी टाइटल को आप ऊपर नीचे नहीं लिख सकते. इट हैज टू बी फॉलोड रिजिडली अकॉर्डिंग टू द सीक्वेंस एक्सप्लेन्ड. So first subheading of current assets is current investments. Current investments means all the investments which are for a period up to or less than 1 year. Second subheading is inventories. Inventories can be further classified in 5 parts: raw material, work in progress, finished goods, stores and spares, as well as loose tools. These all items are put under inventories. Third heading of current assets is trade receivables, which broadly includes debtors and bills receivables. These both items are shown under trade receivables. Next heading is cash and cash equivalents. Cash and cash equivalent head includes balance with the bank, checks, drafts on hand, and cash in hand or cash on hand. So these items are shown under D subheading, that is cash and cash equivalents. Next title is short-term loans and advances. Simple: any type of loan or advance which a company has given either to its employees or to its suppliers for a period up to 1 year or less than 12 months, they all are shown under this heading. If question is silent about investments, then we always take it for long term. Listen again. If in question only word investments alone is written, nothing else, it is always shown under non-current assets. Whereas next and last title is other current liability assets. Under other current assets, the items like prepaid expense, accrued income, advance tax, dividend payable, these items are shown under current assets. Last but not the least, the title is contingent liability and commitments. These items are not shown inside the balance sheet, or if shown inside the balance sheet, they are not added in the total of balance sheet. These items are those liabilities which may or may not arise in the future, because there is a probability that this liability may arise or may not arise. Means वो liabilities जब आप बैलेंस शीट क्लोज कर रहे हो, उनका स्टेटस अभी हमें क्लियर नहीं है. वो मे बी इन फ्यूचर हमारे लिए लाइबिलिटीज बन भी सकती हैं और मे बी वो हमारी लाइबिलिटीज ना भी बने. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, प्रपोज्ड डिविडेंड, that is accounting standard 4 deals with this item of proposed dividend. Proposed dividend means कंपनी अपनी एनुअल जनरल मीटिंग में शेयर होल्डर्स को डिविडेंड प्रपोज करती है. नाउ इट्स परसेंटेज में वेरी. प्रपोज डिविडेंड डिक्लेयर करना है या नहीं होना, दैट इज ऑल अ प्रोबेबिलिटी. Therefore, we cannot show proposed dividend as a confirmed liability. It is contingent liability. Another example of contingent liability means any pending court case. For example, आपकी कंपनी ने किसी दूसरी कंपनी पे केस किया है, या दूसरी किसी एक्स कंपनी ने आपकी कंपनी के ऊपर कोई केस किया है, and that court case is still pending unless and until the verdict comes. We cannot declare or confirm it as a liability. So this is considered as a contingent liability. Similarly, BR discounted yet to be matured. We have already studied this concept कि आपकी कंपनी ने बिल्स रिसीवेबल डिस्काउंट करवा लिया बट अभी उसकी मेच्योरिटी नहीं हुई. So when you are closing your books of accounts and this situation happens, you do not know whether the drawee will mature the bills receivable or not. So these items are either shown in footnotes outside the balance sheet, or if shown in the balance sheet, it is shown as the last bottom and the items are not taken in the total.